Anyway, we're going to start, and we're going to jump a lot of chapters, and you'll see. You know why I know, but you'll see. But we're going to start in Joshua 13 this evening, and then we'll end Joshua 20. Basically, the children of Israel. Last week I made a statement. I didn't know how long this went on. I did a little research and think that possibly the where is it the whole time the book itself, Book of Joshua, takes about 25 years, but the whole time for basically trying to conquer the land was about 7 years. Some say 5, but 7 if you do the math, because it talks about over, and we'll see it in just a few minutes. It talks about Caleb and his age and trying to figure everything out. It works out to about 7 years. So anyway, having said that, we've come to that end. We've come to the end from the standpoint of the children of Israel have finally taken over the land that God had given them. A lot of skirmishes, a lot of battles, like depending upon who you want to take, 5 years, 7 years in that time frame, and it was almost a constant battle. It wasn't maybe necessarily a battle. It says beginning in verse 1, 13th chapter, I just want to kind of read this. It says, Joshua was old, advanced in years. The Lord said to him, you are advanced in years, and there remains very much land to be possessed. This is the land that yet remains, all the territory of the Philistines and all the Geshurites from Sihor. The lords of the Philistines, the Gazites, the also the Ivites, some people have it, from the south, all the land of the Canaanites and Merah belonged to the Sidonians as far as Aphek, to the border of the Amorites, the land of the Gebalites and all Lebanon toward the sunrise from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon as far as the entrance of Hamath. All the inhabitants of the mountains from Lebanon as far as the brook of Mishroth, and all the Sidonians, them I will drive out from before the children of Israel, only divide it by lot to Israel as an inheritance as I have commanded you. Now therefore divide this land as an inheritance to the 9 tribes and a half tribe of Manasseh. But remember, nope. As I was reading them, I was reminded she has passed, but there was a sweet, sweet lady at Pomona, and not highly educated. And I taught an Old Testament class once. I taught, well, a bunch of times, but anyway, one time it had a lot of names. And she says, you can pronounce those so wonderfully. And I thought, you don't know if I'm pronouncing it right or wrong. Bless your heart. Yeah, it sounded good. It sounded good. She was a sweetheart, though. Uh, tell you what, stayed up all night with her husband when she passed away. She was a good one, though. But this is just a division of the land. God basically, okay, we're going to give you all the land. There's land yet to be possessed. It says Joshua was old. I found it interesting. Wiersbe in his commentary kind of paraphrases 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. It kind of just goes through and hits some of the highlights and tries to make some practical points. And one of the things that he said, the practical point that he made for this that I thought was interesting was he says, even in age, the aged servant still has something to offer. And there's a thought for us all, that the aged servant still has something to offer. It may not be as much as what it used to be. It may not be as prevalent as it used to be, but it's still something. And I've shared with you the story of a preacher friend of mine that was working on using your talents and making sure that you did use your talents. And so the next day, one of the little sisters of the congregation, and this was not me, by the way, but one of the little sisters of the congregation called him and said, I just can't do anything anymore. I just not physically able. She said, all I can do is pray. And he said, I'll fix you up. And so he started sending her a list every week of folks or things to pray for. And every Monday he would send it to her. She would then have a week to pray for those things. And so that is to remind us that our age, there are things we can still do. And Joshua can still be used. We still can that, excuse me, what we think we can do. I do like the last part there of verse 6. It says, only divide it by lot to Israel as an inheritance as I commanded you. And one of the things we find out a little later on in the 18th and 19th chapter especially is the fact that I commanded them to do. First part of the 20th and 21st chapter as well. And so what happens then is you see really from there on, you see the land. You see the land divided east of the Jordan. Remember, the half tribe of Reuben, the Gads, the tribe of Manasseh, or the half tribe of Manasseh, Reuben and Gad, were divided or settled on the east side of the Jordan River. This was what they had asked for. This is what they had said we will do. Now, one of the things that they do to their good as you go through these chapters that are just land divisions is that you find out they did exactly what they had promised. They stayed with all the children of Israel, fought because that was the deal. We'll fight with them. We'll stand up with our brethren, and we will do what we need to do with them. But when it comes time to settle the land, we want to stay over here on the east side of the Jordan River, which was good and bad. It was in reality, it was bad for them, but it was probably good for the children of Israel that were on the west side of the Jordan River. And the reason it was bad was because they ended up falling prey to the predators, the folks that the enemies that would come from the east and want to attack Israel. They also were closer then, because they were closer to the enemy, they were also closer to people that did not serve God. And so consequently, they became overrun, if you will, with false teaching. Now, it was good that they were there because they served as a buffer for all those that were on the west side of the Jordan River. Those that were on the west side of the Jordan really were able to know what was coming from their east, if you will. And so you might say, well, good and bad. Yes, it was. But nevertheless, the land was divided. It goes through, first of all, you have the east of the Jordan, then you have the land of Reuben, the land of Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh. It tells the borders there. There's not, it's just, there's not a lot there other than that's the portion that God gave them. Chapter 14, the land is divided west of the Jordan. Caleb gets his inheritance from Hebron. This is where, in the 14th chapter, if you want to look at this for just a minute, look at verse 6 in the 14th chapter. This is where I came up with the 7 years. And like I say, you may not see this, but this is where I came up with it. It says the children, this is Joshua 14, verse 6. Kenizzite said to him, and I brought back him as it was in my heart. Blessed my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt, but I wholly follow the Lord my God. Now this is we know when the 12 spies were sent to the land of Canaan. This is what he's talking about. And then he says, beginning in verse 9, so swore on that day, saying, surely the land where your foot has trodden shall be your inheritance and your children's forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And now, Lord, and now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, as he said, these 45 years, ever since the Lord spoke this word to Moses while Israel wandered in the wilderness. Now here I am this day, 85 years old. And if you go back and he says, okay, when we did this, notice it says in verse 7, I was 40 years old when Moses said Kadesh Barnea. Most folks believe that they were already 2 years into the wilderness at that point in time. So you add the 40 and you get to the 85, or subtract rather, you get 38 years left in the wilderness. Then of course you find a difference basically at 7 years. And so that is where we get that number from. Like I say, you might say, no, I still see 5, because there are some historians that do say 5. But either way, if you come out understanding that the children of Israel, they didn't overtake Israel in a day, they didn't overtake them in a year, that it took a while. And it was a lot of battles and a lot of going back and forth. But Caleb reminds the folks, if you will, of what he had done. Look, go on. Let's just finish this paragraph because it's interesting. He says, as yet, I am as strong this day as on the day that Moses sent me. Just as my strength was then, so now is my strength for war, both for going out and for coming in. Once again, here's that old servant ready to fight. That old servant of age that, oh, I can't do anything. Caleb says, man, I'm ready to go. Now, therefore, give me this mountain of which the Lord spoke in that day, for you heard in that day how that Anakim were there, and that the cities were great and fortified. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall be able to drive them out, as the Lord said. And so Joshua, then it says, blessed him, gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephthah, as an inheritance. Hebron, therefore, became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephthah the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord God of Israel. Notice that what he received it because he followed the Lord. And the name of Hebron formerly was Kirjath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, and the land had rest from war. Now there's key. We finally got to peacetime. And so the land's been divided. We have peacetime. We have then chapter 15, more land that's divided. We have the land of Judah. We have Caleb that occupies Hebron and Beer is what a lot of folks call it. We then have the cities of Judah, all of the cities there. Jay, do you want to read those for us? I mean, they're the names of the cities of Judah. And so then you have Ephraim and West Manasseh. You have the land of Ephraim, and you kind of get a sense of this is not, it's not to say that this is not important. Okay. One of the things that you walk away with is an understanding that the land was divided, that the land did go back to the children of Israel. This is important because there are still some today that believe Israel has not received their land, the promise that God gave to Abraham. They did. They did in the book of Joshua. Now, did God mean it as a perpetual agreement? In other words, I don't think so. And so while some politicians, I think, ruled or did their politicking, if you will, because they believed that Israel was the land that they should get their land and should keep their land perpetually, and I think hurt their political ability. This is because I think they missed out on the understanding. God gave them this land, and so they're dividing it. There's the land then in chapter 18. The remainder of the land's divided. You have the land of Benjamin in chapter 18. And then in chapter 19, you have Simeon's inheritance, Judah. You have the land of Zebulun, the land of Asher, of Naphtali, and of Dan. So division of the land. That was important. They received their land. It was divided. And seemingly, for the most part, there wasn't too many people too upset about the division of the land. There was peace in the land now. War had ended. They had come to the land, and they had done exactly what God had asked of them. Any questions, comments, thoughts? No. There's not a mention. Yeah. 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 And it seems as if when they settle, And in the lands that they settled, they both kind of settled in the hill country, but they settled at a distance far apart. In other words, they didn't buddy up, which, yeah, I agree. Kind of strange. I would thought, man, when 10 people basically came back and said I was crazy, but one guy stuck with me, I'd want to stick with him. Any, yeah, yeah,
Caleb again, not the bad way to say it, but you know what I mean?
right, yeah,
That they became the two
yeah,
tribes, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Israel to the north, Judah to the south. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All the land that they actually, if you right, yeah, you got to dig and put it all, get the maps out, and if you go and look, they seemingly, at least to me, went a little further south, especially south more so than north, but they went a little further south than they really occupied. In other words, they dipped down a little further, and then they decided, well, we can't have all this, and so they came back up north a little bit, um, maybe a couple hundred miles, maybe not that far, maybe about 100 or so. And so, but yeah, good point. Yeah, yeah. All right. Anything else? Well, let's look at the 20th chapter. I do want to spend a few minutes in the 20th chapter. Cities of refuge. Cities of refuge are interesting. You find more about this. I'm going to stick pretty much to this text, but if you want more on the cities of refuge, go to the book of Numbers chapter 35 and Deuteronomy chapter 19, and you'll find more information on the cities of refuge. But remember, in Old Testament times, they didn't have police. And so sometimes folks would take somebody's life, premeditated murder. Sometimes it was an accident. Because there were not police, the family then would have somebody that would be what was called an avenger of blood and family member, and he would go and take the life of the individual that took the life of their loved one. That was considered acceptable. However, if you took someone's life, whether it was premeditated or not, if you took someone's life, you could run to one of these cities of refuge. There were actually three that were placed on the west side of the Jordan River, and there were three placed on the east side of the Jordan River. And you could run to these cities. And when you got there, basically you were met at the gate and your story was told. And if your story was feasible, they would let you into the city. If it was not, they wouldn't let you into the city. If they let you into the city, then they would do further investigation. As long as you were in one of those cities, whether the murder you committed was premeditated or not, if you were allowed into those cities, and usually they didn't let, if they knew or believed somebody had committed premeditated murder, they didn't let them in. But sometimes they went to council. And if it was decided, though, that you did commit premeditated murder, you had to go outside at the city, and the avenger of blood then for the family would take your life. It was that old saying, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. If, however, you were found that what you did was not premeditated, but was what we would call an accident, you could live in that city of refuge until the high priest died. And then once he died, you could go home. Now, if you stop and think about what you gave up, you gave up a lot. You gave up your freedom. You gave up being at home, being with family, being with friends. You gave up your liberty to live in these cities. But at the same time, too, you were able to live. If not, if the family was so grieved by what you did, even though maybe it was an accident. And they sent the avenger blood to come get you and take you out, as the saying goes. And you were not in these cities. It was something that was considered all right. It's pretty rough, you might say. But these cities of refuge were established by God, they're talked about in Numbers 35 and Deuteronomy 19, that deal with what goes on in them. So, but let's talk about them, or let's read these verses. Joshua chapter 20. The Lord also spoke to Joshua, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, Appoint for yourself cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you through Moses. And that's the Numbers 35 and Deuteronomy 19. That the slayer who kills a person accidentally or unintentionally may flee there, and they shall be your refuge from the danger of blood, just what we said. And when he flees to one of those cities and stands at the entrance of the gate of the city and declares his case in the hearing of the elders of that city, they shall take him into the city as one of them and give him a place that he may dwell among them. The gates of the city is where all the business was taken care of. It was where all the judicial things were taken care of. It was where all the taxation things were taken care of. It was anything that had what we would deem a court was taken care of in the gates of the city. And so this was not unusual for in the gates of the city, the elders of the city, the ones that were and elders, we don't mean elders like we think of church, but older folks, the wise men of the city. And so it says that he would give them a place to dwell among them. Then verse 5, then if the avenger of blood pursues him, they shall not deliver the slayer into his hand, because he struck his neighbor unintentionally, but did not hate him beforehand. In other words, here's a man accidentally kills somebody. He gets to the city of refuge. They let him in. They say they maybe even have a proceeding. They say he's all right. They let him live in the city of refuge. The avenger of blood can come. He cannot take his life. He gets to live. He lives there. He lives there being all right, as we said, having his liberty taken away, but at the same time, too, still having life. And verse 6, and he shall dwell in that city until he stands before the congregation for judgment. You see, this is where they might have then a court of law, so to speak, a court proceeding. Proceeding where maybe they've investigated a little bit further to find out. And then it says, until the death of the one who is the high priest in those days. Well, excuse me. Yeah, and until the death, then the slayer may return and come to his own city and his own house, to the city from which he fled. So when the high priest died, if you'd been in a city of refuge for 10 years and the high priest dies, then you get to go back home. Everything sort of started over. Kind of a strange, weird thing, but nevertheless, that's what happened. And so, to me, that has always been an interesting thought and an interesting study to think about how they policed themselves, if you will. So, verse 7, they appointed Kadesh in Galilee. Now I'm going to give you the names, and the only reason I'm going to give you what the names mean is because everybody I was reading kept saying these names, the meaning of these names are important. I don't see it, but that's not to say you don't. But nevertheless, they appointed Kadesh. Kadesh means holy in Galilee, in the mountains of Naphtali, Shechem, which means shoulder, in the mountains of Ephraim, and Kirjath Arba, which means fellowship, which is also really Hebron, is in the mountains of Judah. And then on the other side of the Jordan, by Jericho eastward, they assigned Bezer, or Bezer, which means a fortification in the wilderness of the plain for the tribe of Reuben. Hamath, which means height, as in how tall something is, in Gilead from the tribe of Gad. And Golan, which means exaltation, in Bashan from the tribe of Manasseh. These were the cities appointed for all the children of Israel and for the stranger who dwelt among them. For whoever killed a person accidentally might flee there and not die by the hand of the avenger of blood till he stood before the congregation. And still he had a judgment until he had a judgment. And then once he had a judgment, he could stay there forever, or he'd be cast out of the city. And when he was cast out of the city, that was bad things, because usually the Avenger of Blood was out there waiting for you, and he'd get you. Anything in that chapter? Anything? It's a short chapter. They would make their judgment. They'd let you in. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, it seems as if, from what we can gather, that they did do. They would hear your story, and of course, then if the Avenger of Blood would come, you would hear his story, his side of the story. But they would also have a court proceedings, whereas they would gather somehow. And I haven't, in studying this several times before, I've never found out exactly how they went about gathering the information, but they would evidently gather the information to have a court proceeding of some kind, and from that they would make their decision, you know, um, whether he was guilty or innocent. Yeah. I was trying to figure out what something like that. I'm glad you came up with that, because I was trying to figure out something like that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you had to come by yourself. But yeah, the only thing I could come up with was, you just hope the high priest is old. That's all I could come up. Yours is better. Yours is far better. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The families. It could be a family member even. Seems, and the way I read. Now, I did not get into this today, and so I need a refresher course on it. But it seemed like it could be anybody in the family. Family would send the individual out. Yes.
Yeah, that's why the one that did it, he didn't have time to get his buddies to go with it, because he had to get to this city.
That's right.
They caught him.
Yeah, you couldn't carry a family with you. Yeah, it was just.
Posse, the sheriff, whoever the family appoints, they're gonna be on your trail and better get there fast.
Yes. Yeah.
That's why they had 6 cities spread out, so you couldn't get there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You didn't. Yeah. After you committed it, you didn't sit around and wait, for a day or two and try to figure out where you're going to go. You knew exactly where you should go and had to go, and you had to leave then. So yeah, you didn't get a U-Haul and load it up and take it with you. So, yeah. Good point. Good point. Anything else? Well, look, at 21. How much time back? Okay. Good. The heads of the father, this is beginning in verse 1. The heads of the father's house of the Levites came near to Eleazar. This, of course, Eleazar was the son of Aaron, the priest, to Joshua the son of Nun, to the heads of the father's house of the tribes of the children of Israel. And they spoke to them at Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, the Lord commanded through Moses to give a city to dwell in, with common lands for our livestock. So the children of Israel gave to the Levites for their inheritance, at the command of the Lord, these cities and their common lands. So the priest didn't do that. Now, they didn't have, for lack of a better term, okay, they didn't have states. They had cities. They were given such, and when you get into it, you also know that they not only had the city proper, but the limits extended beyond the city to about 3,500 feet from the city. And this is where they could have their gardens and things like this. Because remember, now, we think of cities as, but remember, cities were buildings one right next to the other, next to the other, next to the other, next to. Sort of like what they're building in Nashville now. But they're right on top of each other, and sometimes you lived over, families lived together because you didn't have a lot of stuff. You didn't need a lot of stuff. You just sort of needed somewhere to lay your head at night. And no TVs. Couldn't break baseball. So they didn't have all of that. And they didn't need much, and they didn't need much space, much area. But outside the city, especially the Levites outside their cities, were about the 3,500 feet out. They could go and they would have their gardens and their other things that they needed. But this was the land that they were promised. And so God them. Notice verse 3 again. This occurs, and I didn't really emphasize it in chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, but it's this thought from their inheritance at the commandment of the Lord. In other words, they did what the Lord told them. They divided it the way the Lord wanted it done. And so these folks had this land. They had these areas. Even the Levites were given at least property. Now skip on down to verse 43 of this same chapter, chapter 21. So the Lord gave to Israel all the land of which he had sworn to give to their fathers. It works two ways. They did what God told them to do, but God did what he said he was going to do. So God made a promise. He kept his promise, and they fulfilled what they were told to do. So the Lord gave to Israel all the land which he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it and dwelt in it. The Lord gave them rest all around according to all that he had sworn to their fathers, and not a man of all their enemies stood against them. The Lord delivered all of their enemies into their hand. Not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All came to pass. That's, I think, impressive. It's impressive because it does say God promised, God delivered. But God promised and delivered based upon what? Their obedience. They're doing their part. And that's what we all need to remember. That's what we need to teach. It's not a matter of earning it. It's not a matter of, I earned this or I deserve this. It's a matter of just meeting the expectations that God has put out for us to do our part, and then God will do his part. Our part is obedience to his will, and God's part, if you will, is the promises that he's made to us. And so the children of Israel were able to occupy then the land. Here's a note I made for myself today. I should have included this in the first part of the chapter. It was believed that at the time there were 23,000 Levites at the time. And if you divided it into the 48 cities that they were given, that means there were approximately in each city 500 Levites in each city. And so that helps you a little bit. Anything in that chapter? Okay. Well, yeah. Kind of wilderness country. Yeah. Common land. Yeah. Yeah. In other words, see, some of these cities were in lands that had been given to the tribes. And so the priest had, or the Levites had these areas, these cities. And unless you were a Levite, you couldn't inhabit the area. You had to stay off of that area. That was theirs. Anything else? Good question. All right. Well, now we get back to text. And we get back to looking at things that it all makes sense, but it's a little bit, it's one of those things when I study that part of Joshua, and you may like to go into it with great detail, and that's wonderful. When I study that part of Joshua, those areas don't mean that much to me. That's if you will, a foreign land. And those markers are gone now. And so when you get down to the fact God gave as he promised because they did what God told them to do, that's what matters. And that's the part that matters in the story. But now when you get into the 22nd chapter, get towards the end of the book, and as you get towards the end of the book, one of the things, well, this next sort of paragraph is really a couple of paragraphs in. As you go forth, here's some things to remember as you go forth. Verse 1 of chapter 22 connects everything that's just been said. Because notice what he says, then Joshua called. In other words, all this happened. They fought, they conquered the land, they got to a point where they divided the land. Then Joshua called the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh and said to them, you've kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I commanded you. You've not left your brethren these many days up to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brethren as he promised them. Now therefore return, go to your tents and to the land of your possessions, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But take careful to do the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all of his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, serve him with all your heart, with all your soul. Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. I want to look at this in a little detail, if you don't mind. If you were to say anything, like I said, I would entitle this paragraph for me, and I did in my study, as you go forth. Here's some things to remember as you go forth. And the one basic idea in all of it is keep your focus. Think about what he did. He calls then the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh, because remember, as we've said, you had Manasseh, you had a half tribe to the east of the Jordan River, another half to the west of the Jordan River. So you had East Manasseh and West Manasseh. When you look at maps, that's the way it's often indicated. But he calls them together and he says, you kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you and have obeyed my voice. You kept. The word kept is interesting. It's the idea you've guarded, you've watched. You've watched, you've guarded, you've done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded. You obeyed my voice. Now remember, this is Joshua speaking. You obeyed my voice in all, and there's the key word, all that I commanded you. Not in some, but in all. And you've not left your brethren these many days up to this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God. Now think about this. Think about this. When the children of Israel in the second chapter, third chapter, when they crossed over and they marched around the walls of Jericho, from a standpoint of believing these two and a half tribes, if you want to call them that, these two and a half tribes could have basically said, it's time to go home. Let's gather mama, let's gather daughter, let's gather children, let's gather everything, let's go home because our land is settled. We don't have to stay over here and fight and march around the walls of Jericho. We don't have to go in and take Ai. We don't have to go to all these other cities. Our land is settled. It's quiet. It's peaceful. We can go be at home. But they held true to their word. We'll go fight. We'll stand with you. We'll be your brethren. We'll stand with you. We are loyal. We are true. We are faithful. And we'll do what we said we promised, because they had promised. Because when they asked for the land, they were told that they could have the land. But stay with your brethren. And so they they followed it. I'm going to stop right there. There's a lot more I want to say and kind of get some feedback and some thoughts. Anything anybody wants to say or to add to any of that? Verse 5 is one of those beautiful verses in the Bible that reminds us of our responsibilities. All right. Well, if no one has anything else to say or to add, let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day. We're thankful for the blessing of it, for the fact that we were able to enjoy it. We had the health and strength that we had. We're thankful for your love for us and for you watching out for us, protecting us. And we ask that with the impending storms of tonight, that you will keep us safe and those that we know and love, that you'll keep us all safe, and that there'll be no loss of life or of property. We ask that you be with those that were announced earlier, that Jay announced, those that are sick, those that are going through difficult times. We ask that you be with them, that you bless them and keep them. We ask that you be with every effort that's put forth, be with Brother Adriano and his family and their work that they are doing in Brazil. We look forward to seeing them this summer, and we ask your blessings upon their safety as well. We ask that you watch over us, bless us, and keep us, and hold us as we hold to you. For this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. If you're traveling this weekend for Easter, be careful, be safe, come back to us safe. If folks are coming to see you, enjoy them. Y'all have a great weekend.